Erie Inc., a writing space for youth. We provide creative expression opportunities and academic support to youth in the greater Cleveland community. And this week marks our 10th birthday. I can't think of a more perfect way to celebrate than with all of you on this fabulous day of creativity, story, and art. If you want to learn more about what we do and how to get involved, please check out our website at lakeerieinc.org or follow us on social media. Videos of our speakers and of today's panels will be up on our YouTube page. Before tonight's guest speaker takes the stage, I want to share our deep gratitude for the folks who helped us make this event possible. Cleveland Public Library for providing us the space, the virtual space, to make this event happen. The Cleveland Heights University Heights Library for supporting the ASL interpreters, and to all of our event supporters and sponsors. Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, the Ohio Arts Council, Max Back's Books on Coventry, Blick Art Materials, the Tabor family, Nancy Schwartz-Katz, Joni Berger, Andy Traers, Claire McBroom, and Stephen and Joan Werber. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to our very own super creative and talented teacher and teen coordinator at Lake Erie Inc., Cordelia Eddy.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone to Lake Erie Inc.'s 9th Annual Kids Comic-Con. It's been so exhilarating to learn and be inspired by so many creators working in the field, in addition to so many young people who are taking the world of comics by storm. Teens, I wanted to let you know that after this talk, there will be an opportunity for you to use chat to ask questions. I recognize there will also likely be many adults who are eager to ask questions, but as a youth-serving organization, we're hoping to first give space to teens to ask the questions that matter to them. I must say that I'm overjoyed to be introducing a writer, an artist, and a visionary that I have admired since I myself was a teen. When I was around 12, I had often take a bus from Pennsylvania to stay with my dad who lived in New York. And on one of those trips, my dad had to work, so I spent the day walking around St. Mark's Place with a longtime mentor of mine and my dad's friend and comic scholar, Hillary Shute. That day, Hillary had bought me a black and white checkerboard coat, and we paused at a newsstand laughing about fashion magazines and ultimately leaving with an issue of Roberta Gregory's Naughty Bits. And Hillary told me that I had to read it, and that moment opened me up to a whole world that I didn't know existed. As far as comics go, I have never been able to identify with superheroes, and up until that point in time, that's all that I thought comics were. And there was something about an explosively angry, everyday woman that just struck a chord with me, and I knew there was no turning back. And in retrospect, maybe it's just that Naughty Bits passed the Bechdel tests. But I think what really mattered to me was that at that moment, I realized that comics could be about people like me. And it wasn't long before I discovered a whole world I had been missing out on, and soon found many versions of myself and my relationships in Dykes to Watch Out For, Fun Home, and Are You My Mother as well. It has long been cliche that everybody finds themselves in Alison's work, and I'm sure we all have our own mental laundry lists of idiosyncrasies and overlaps. But at the same time, as cliche as that might be, for teens coming to understand themselves for the first time, finding yourself in work like Alison, seeing your neuroses or your sexuality or gender expression or family drama unfold on the page is no short of invigorating. Comics are capable of showing us alternative visions for our lives and are a means of connecting with and initiating ourselves into groups of people who are like us. I believe that graphic memoir helps us to better listen to our own internal dialogues and to learn and to draw ourselves in ways we never envisioned were possible. And this is even more true now at a time when we're all drawn apart. Graphic narrative offers a kind of empathic and personal rawness that we're all craving and needing. I would now like to welcome to the stage the creator of Dykes to Watch Out For, the graphic novel turned hit Broadway musical Fun Home, someone whose work has appeared in The New Yorker, Slate, New York Times Book Review, and Granta, someone who has inspired and impacted so many of us through her powerful interplay between cultural and literary commentary, words, and image, Alison Bechdel.
Hey! Cordelia, thank you so much for that very lovely introduction. That was kind of amazing. I'm so happy to be here. Happy spring, everyone in Cleveland and wherever you are. So I'm going to start tonight by talking about the course of my career. I'm just going to give you like a brief outline of my history as a cartoonist. And then I'm going to do a short reading from my book, Fun Home. And then we will do Q&A. So as I talk, I hope you will start thinking up some good questions. Otherwise, we're going to have to spend like the last part of this session with you just like staring at me, staring at you. So start thinking. I'm going to share my screen. Uh-oh. Stand by. Okay. I want to share not the whole screen. Well, you know what? I'm just going to share the whole screen. I'm gonna probably disappear, I think. Stand by. Maybe let's try this. No, I've got to share the whole screen. Okay. Sorry. This is kind of amazing that we're able to do this at all, but there's a few kinks to work out. Okay. Okay. I hope you can all hear me. Someone's got to communicate with me somehow because I can't see anyone anymore. And I'm just in my own little world here with my slides. I feel really lucky to have had a very strong sense of what my work is ever since I was very young. This is a cat cowboy. This is a general that I drew when I was 5. As a cartoonist, my job is drawing pictures and writing stories. And I've been drawing for as long as I can remember. And as soon as I learned to make letters and numbers, I would put those into my drawings too, as you can see here or here. Something just really exciting, something almost mystical to me about that combination of text and pictures. Here's a newspaper I did for a while as a kid. Again, words and pictures together. And one day when I was around 7, I realized that I could actually tell stories with pictures. I just started drawing one day on this pad of typing paper, which was already kind of an incipient book, and I treated each page of the pad as a different panel of my story. And I just started turning the page and telling the story. So this guy is saying, "Here comes his train now." This guy says, "He's not among the passengers." I hadn't yet learned that very fundamental lesson of cartooning, which is write the words out before you put the balloon around them. This guy's getting thrown off the train, and stay out. And take your book with you. The engineer throws his book off the train. So that's why the train's late. He's been talking to the engineer. Still haven't quite got that lesson down. Hi, good to see you. It was just so fun as I was just like, I'd turn the page and draw the next scene. I couldn't turn the pages fast enough. It was just super exciting. There's a chase scene. There's some kind of crash. You can see I had a good grasp of those stars. This cartoon emanata, they're called. That's the technical term for those little symbols that come out of the character's head or body. So I recall very vividly the pleasure of telling this story, of being so completely immersed in this story. And I think most people would agree this is the best feeling in the world, being so absorbed in something you're doing that time stops. You're not thinking about yourself at all. You're not feeling anxious. You're just doing this thing that you're doing. And I'm always trying to get back to that feeling I had when I was 7 years old and writing this story. I have glimpses of it, but it's kind of harder to do as you get older. So I drew a lot as a kid, and I also started to write as well. My father gave me this calendar when I was 10 to keep a diary in. And here he is explaining me how to do it. He even wrote down the first sentence for me. Dad is reading. So at age 10, I began keeping a regular diary and really kind of never stopped. I still keep a diary. I've always, ever since then, kept track of the stuff I do every day. So I loved writing, I loved drawing, and I pretty much wanted to be a cartoonist as soon as I knew that was something you could be. I filled this form out in 6th grade. I wanted to be one of those people who wrote and drew stories. I was very clear about that, much more clear than I was about getting married or having children, as you can see on the questionnaire here. There was just something magical to me about cartoons. Like, for example, I could never understand these Charles Addams cartoons in the New Yorker that the magazine that my parents got, but that's precisely why I love them so much. Here's this cartoon. The caption reads, "We won't be late, Miss Weems. Get the children to bed around 8 and keep your back to the wall at all times." Like, what does that mean? As a child, I had no idea what that meant, but there was something just endlessly fascinating about trying to puzzle it out, just looking at this picture, reading those words. What does it all mean? So I knew I wanted to become a cartoonist, but before I could become a cartoonist, I had to grow up. I had to make it through adolescence. This is the little booklet that they handed out to all the girls when I was in 6th grade. Doesn't it sound like a threat? I did not relate to this young woman at all, and I was hoping I might be exempted from the whole process of growing up, but I was not. I did somehow manage to survive high school, though, mostly by drawing constantly in my school notes. I was always getting in trouble for that. I eventually made it to college somehow, still drawing in my notes. And in college, my big achievement in college was to realize I was a lesbian, to come out. And soon after I graduated from college, I actually kind of became a cartoonist. I started drawing a comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For in my early 20s when I moved to New York City. It was just for fun, for free, but it also felt really important to me because unlike that serene young woman in the Growing Up and Liking It brochure, I did not see myself reflected in the world. So I decided I would create that reflection. I didn't see people who looked like me and my friends, so I was going to start drawing them. And that's kind of what my job became for most of my life. I started writing about a little group of friends of this community of lesbians and other kinds of people gradually got added into the mix. I'll just show you a couple of these things. It was the comic strip was like a soap opera. Like there'd be a new episode every 2 weeks, and it would follow the adventures of these characters, and they would actually get older. they would age in real time. Like this little boy was born in the comic strip and then got older. Over the 25 years that I drew this comic strip, things really changed for LGBTQ people. It just became a much easier thing in the world, much easier to be out and live openly. It was not so easy when I was young, but it was much easier for me than it was for earlier generations, of course. But I felt really clear, like my mission was to show that queer people, were humans, to show our real everyday lives so people would see that we're just, for better or worse, like everyone else. So I did this comic strip for 25 years. And towards the end of the time I was drawing the strip, it ended in 2008, but toward the end of that time, I also began working on another project, something more personal, something that was even more about my particular life. And when I look back on my work with Dykes to Watch Out For, I can see that it was the whole fact that I was doing this work, this lesbian comic strip, was really kind of a reaction, I think, to a hard thing that had happened in my life. When I was back in college and coming out, I decided this was something I should tell my parents. So I sent them a letter. And in response to that letter, I got this very staggering phone call from my mother. I had no idea about this. It was the first it had ever occurred to me that my father might be gay. And it was like I had sort of unwittingly stumbled into this dark secret of my parents, and sort of triggered a cascade of events. My mother decided around this time that she was tired of putting up with this, and she asked my father for a divorce. It was a very confusing period. I was able to have one conversation with my dad about both of us being queer in some way. And it was funny because I was on the brink of, like, to me, coming out was like, it was part of becoming an adult. I felt like I was finally, like, leaving my parents, going off on my own in the world, staking my own course. But instead, I kind of got pulled back into my family and my parents' drama, because what happened next was my father died. And we were pretty sure that it was not an accident, that he had jumped in front of this truck. So as I thought about this over the course of my life and the years after that, I felt really determined that I wanted to lead a different kind of life. I was going to be completely open about my sexuality. And also, I was going to try to help make it okay for other people. I wanted to do something about reducing that kind of shame and stigma that had made my father feel like he couldn't go on living. So that was really my mission during all the years I was drawing my comic strip. So then I decided I wanted to actually tell the story of my dad. The story of me and my father, of these two queer people both growing up in the same small town, but whose lives turned out very differently. So now I'm going to wrap up my presentation by reading a brief piece of the book to you, the beginning of my book, Fun Home. Chapter 1, Old Father, Old Artificer. Like many fathers, mine could occasionally be prevailed on for a spot of airplane. As he launched me, my full weight would fall on a pivot point between his feet and my stomach. It was a discomfort well worth the rare physical contact, and certainly worth the moment of perfect balance when I soared above him. In the circus, acrobatics where one person lies on the floor balancing another are called Icarian games. Considering the fate of Icarus, after he flouted his father's advice and flew so close to the sun that his wings melted, perhaps some dark humor is intended. In our particular reenactment of this mythic relationship, it was not me, but my father, who was to plummet from the sky. But before he did so, he managed to get quite a lot done. His greatest achievement, arguably, was his monomaniacal restoration of our old house. When other kids called our house a mansion, I would demur. I resented the implication that my family was rich or unusual in any way. In fact, we were unusual, though I wouldn't appreciate exactly how unusual until much later, but we were not rich. The gilt cornices, the marble fireplace, the crystal chandeliers, the shelves of calf-bound books, these were not so much bought as produced from thin air by my father's remarkable legerdemain. My father could spin garbage into gold. He could transfigure a room with the smallest offhand flourish. He could conjure an entire finished period interior from a paint chip. He was an alchemist of appearance, a savant of surface, a Daedalus of decor. For if my father was Icarus, he was also Daedalus, that skillful artificer, that mad scientist who built the wings for his son and designed the famous labyrinth, and who answered not to the laws of society, but to those of his craft. Historical restoration wasn't my father's job, it was his passion. And I mean passion in every sense of the word: libidinal, manic, martyred. Our Gothic revival house had been built during the small Pennsylvania town's one brief moment of wealth from the lumber industry in 1867, but local fortunes had declined steadily from that point. And by the time my parents bought the place in 1962, it was a shell of its former self. The shutters and scrollwork were gone. The clapboards had been sheathed with scabrous shingles. The bare light bulbs revealed dingy wartime wallpaper and woodwork painted pastel green. All that was left of the house's lumber-era glory were the exuberant front porch supports. But over the next 18 years, my father would restore the house to its original condition, and then some. He would perform, as Daedalus did, dazzling displays of artfulness. He would cultivate the barren yard into a lush, flowering landscape. He would manipulate flagstones that weighed half a ton, and the thinnest quivering layers of gold leaf. Sorry, I'm going to skip ahead here. My father began to seem morally suspect to me long before I knew that he actually had a dark secret. He used his skillful artifice not to make things, but to make things appear to be what they were not. That is to say, impeccable. He appeared to be an ideal husband and father, for example, but would an ideal husband and father have sex with teenage boys? It's tempting to suggest in retrospect that our family was a sham, that our house was not a real home at all, but the simulacrum of one, a museum. Yet, we really were a family, and we really did live in those period rooms. Still, something vital was missing. An elasticity, a margin for error. Most people, I imagine, learn to accept that they're not perfect. But an idle remark about my father's tie over breakfast could send him into a tailspin. My mother established a rule. If we couldn't criticize my father, showing affection for him was an even dicier venture. We were not a physically expressive family, to say the least, but once I was unaccountably moved to kiss my father goodnight. Having little practice with the gesture, all I managed was to grab his hand and bust the knuckles lightly, as if he were a bishop or an elegant lady, before rushing from the room in embarrassment. This embarrassment on my part was a tiny scale model of my father's more fully developed self-loathing. His shame inhabited our house as pervasively and invisibly as the aromatic musk of aging mahogany. In fact, the meticulous period interiors were expressly designed to conceal it. Mirrors, distracting bronzes, multiple doorways. Visitors often got lost upstairs. My mother, my brothers, and I knew our way around well enough, but it was impossible to tell if the Minotaur lay beyond the next corner. And the constant tension was heightened by the fact that some encounters could be quite pleasant. His bursts of kindness were as incandescent as his tantrums were dark. Although I'm good at enumerating my father's flaws, it's hard for me to sustain much anger at him. I expect this is partly because he's dead, and partly because the bar is lower for fathers than for mothers. My mother must have bathed me hundreds of times. But it's my father rinsing me off with the purple metal cup that I remember most clearly. The suffusion of warmth as the hot water sluiced over me. The sudden, unbearable cold of its absence. Was he a good father? I want to say at least he stuck around, but of course he didn't. It's true that he didn't kill himself until I was nearly 20. But his absence resonated retroactively, echoing back through all the time I knew him. Maybe it was the converse of the way amputees feel pain in a missing limb. He really was there all those years, a flesh and blood presence, steaming off the wallpaper, digging up the dogwoods, polishing the finials, smelling of sawdust and sweat and designer cologne. But I ached as if he were already gone. Okay. That is the end of my reading. Did that all work? Could you all see my show?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you. It was really cool hearing parts of Fun Home from the narrator's voice too. So we are moving into time for Q&A. So at this time, I wanted to open up questions for teens first. So if you're a teen and you have any questions for Alison, you can go ahead and type those into chat and I can field those. And then if we have time, we'll also offer the opportunity for adults to ask questions too.
I hope someone has something. Like I said, otherwise we're just going to stand here.
I tried to take some notes with some possible questions, but I don't want to be taking up that question space if we have any teens who have any questions.
I can have a question if no one has it. You just let me know. I mean,
You have a question for yourself?
Well, I'll ask a question that I always get asked eventually. So I could just ask that one. Shall I?
Someone also has asked why, when I searched you up, it said Simpsons was there. The Simpsons. Do you know why there's like any connection between your name and The Simpsons and Google?
I had a cameo on The Simpsons.
What?
And there's actually,
yeah.
There's you have to go find this episode. It's called Springfield Splendor, and Lisa goes to a Comic-Con. It's really great, and I'm one of the guests at the Comic-Con, just like I am tonight. Very meta.
That is, yeah. Okay, cool. So there's your answer. We have another question here about any thoughts about the Ring of Keys. I don't know what thoughts of specifically, but.
Oh, this person is referring to a song in the from the Broadway musical that unbelievably was made from my graphic memoir. This was the question I was going to ask if no one had anything. I was going to say, what was it like to see your childhood turned into a Broadway musical? And then I would tell you what I'm going to tell you, which was so this one song, Ring of Keys, is made around a specific moment in my book where, as a very young child, 4 or 5, I saw this butch lesbian. I was out with my dad. We both saw this woman. And I'd always been a very boyish little girl, and my dad would always try to like put me in dresses, and we were always having this struggle. And when he saw me looking at this lesbian, this was 1964 or 5. I didn't know what a lesbian was. I just knew that this woman looked awesome. She had short hair and men's clothes. She was like a delivery person with a hand truck. And I was just mesmerized. And my dad saw me looking at her, and he said, "Is that what you want to look like?" And yes, I did, but I knew that I couldn't say that to him. So I said no. So it was funny because in the same instant, I saw someone who I identified with, and I also learned that was not okay. That the way this woman was presenting herself in the world was absolutely not okay. And I think my father, when he saw her, felt very threatened, about his own sexuality that he was carefully keeping hidden. So I always remembered that, very early childhood memory, and I wrote about it in Fun Home, and then it got turned into a song in the musical, a very beautiful song where, well, the musical's really interesting because it has 3 versions of me in it. There's me as a little kid, me in college when I'm coming out, and then me as a grown-up writing this book about my family. So the little child, like the 10-year-old actor, sings this song about seeing that delivery woman, and it's wild. It's like this lesbian anthem. It's just a really cool song, and I don't know much about musicals. I'm not really a musical theater person, but it's been really interesting to me how that musical and the songs in it have really just taken off in the culture. I think it's found a younger audience and a wider audience through being a musical, which is all very wonderful.
Absolutely. So we have another question in chat, which is about creative process. So you can talk more generally. This person also is curious about whether you script or thumbnail your work, or if you're just more interested in starting drawing. You talked earlier about how when you were a kid, you kind of liked that in the zone process of getting into drawing, and remind me of Linda Berry, and whether your process is similar today or has it changed a lot?
I wish my process were similar. It has changed a lot. It's gotten much more elaborate and kind of constipated. I do a lot of thinking and writing and sketching. It's kind of hard to describe my process. I wish I could just show you, but that would take us all night for me to switch my screen back. I write in a drawing program. So even though it might look, if you were watching me work, it would look like I was just typing on the computer. I'm actually typing words and descriptions of images into an Illustrator page that's, broken into panels. So it's already like a comics page, and I'm moving things around on it. I'm not actually drawing, but I know what the drawings are going to be as I'm writing. So sometimes during that process, I will make sketches and plug those in. But my process is more writing heavy at the beginning. And only when I get stuff written out to my satisfaction and mapped out on the page the way I want it to go, that's when I start the actual pencil drawings and like many layers of pencil drawings until I finally do my ink. And it's kind of a long, tedious process.
Someone in chat doesn't have exactly a question, but I can try and turn it into one. So this person's talking about how you can create comics based on your own life, yet they somehow are able to connect to so many people and resonate with so many people. So how is it that you can create comics that are so specific to you and your story that at the same time are so relatable to such a wide audience of people?
I'm very glad you feel that way about my work. That makes me really happy because I never quite know. I think that is the key question about anyone writing any kind of memoir, is how do you elevate a story to be about more than just your particular experience. One thing for me that I do is I like to bring other material into my own story. I feel like when I was writing the book about my dad, for a long time it was just the story of me and my dad and growing up in my family. But at a certain point, I realized I wanted to know more about my father. And he'd been dead for a long time by then, so how was I going to do that? And I finally came up with a plan to read some of his favorite books. I knew the authors he loved most and who he had always been kind of badgering me to read, and I would resist him as a young person and say, I don't want to read F. Scott Fitzgerald, that's dumb. But now I was like hungry to figure out what did he love so much about Fitzgerald or Proust or James Joyce. So I started reading these books, and I found that material, the stories of these other authors, the books that those other authors had written were starting to kind of come into my own work. I was quoting them. I was seeing parallels with their lives and my father's life. And that really opened up the story, and I think made it perhaps more accessible to more people. I wrote another graphic memoir about my mother, and that was not just about me and my mother, but it was also about therapy and psychoanalysis. As you might imagine, I've done some therapy in my life, having this kind of crazy childhood, and therapy was like very salvational for me. It really, really helped me, and I became curious about why. What is it about sitting and talking to someone in a room that can really heal and change someone, can really transform a person? So this next book about my mother was also about psychoanalysis, and a wonderful 20th century British children's analyst named Donald Winnicott, who had a lot of amazing theories about the earliest stages of childhood. So by weaving in all that material into my own story, I feel like that, again, was another way of broadening it out, maybe making it more accessible to others. So that's one thing I do.
Kind of makes me think about, and feel free anyone to add another question into chat, adults or teens, how in Fun Home, you draw upon fiction in a memoir, and there's so much going on about, the line between fiction and reality. And just curious about whether you feel like when you're writing fictional characters, if the process feels different from writing real people, or, what is it like to write a real person versus to write a character? Does it feel like the same thing, or does it feel different to you?
That's a really good question. It does feel different. I feel now like it kind of amazes me that for 25 years I actually kept that fictional world of my comic strip going. I was just like making stuff up, making up characters and scenarios. I feel like I don't know how people really make fiction up. I mean, I did it, but in a way, writing my comic strip felt more like almost like a kind of journalism. Like I wasn't just making stuff up. I was kind of writing about what was happening in the culture, what my friends were talking about and thinking about. Maybe that's all fiction is too, just writing down what's going on in the world. But it was hard to change gears to write about actual people. Like I realized I was going to have to put like words in the mouth of my parents and my family, and that's really tricky to do. Of course, I don't have a transcript of my life. I have no idea what anyone actually said. I have my memories. I have my notes. I have my diary, fortunately. But it actually recreating people's dialogue from 40, 50 years ago is an interesting challenge. When I think of my comic strip, all those characters were basically just versions of myself, like saying things in kind of the way I would say them. But I had to try and not do that as I was writing about real people.
We've got a question that's a pretty
Not sure how well I succeeded.
good segue, which is just this idea of, are there any stories that are too personal to write about? You definitely go into very personal territory in your work. This person asks, do you ever ask permission, or is there a line that you draw?
That's a really good question. I do try to ask permission when possible. I didn't exactly ask permission of my mother to tell this story about my father, because I felt somehow like when you're a child of parents, I feel like there's a way that you have a right to tell the story of your childhood. Like they brought you into this world, so somehow that story is yours to tell. That's debatable. I've never really sat down and engaged in the ethics of that with anyone, but that's kind of my personal feeling. But when you start adding in other people, even my brothers, I try to keep my brothers out of my writing as much as I can. In more recent work that I've done, I've had to talk about my partner or my ex-girlfriend, and I do get everyone to like sign off on the stuff I'm doing, which is often an interesting process because I'm always writing it from my perspective, and it's actually helpful as a writer to have someone, show this scene to someone else and say, is this okay with you? And she says, that's not what happened. And it's a very good correction. And I have to realize that I'm not the center of the universe.
It puts a stop on the process. So we have a question. A lot of people are asking about Fun Home, the musical, and what it was like to watch your life unfold or your book become a musical. We have another question about D.W. Winnicott and what the process was like to use, that type of work in brainstorming for your comic, for Are You My Mother? So either one you can touch upon.
I'll answer them both. Watching that musical evolve was a trip. It was just mind-blowing. I feel like in a way, I kind of got the tables turned on me. Like I was writing about my family, you know, they didn't know what that was going to look like, or, you know, they sort of didn't have control over that. And just in the same way, I didn't have control over what happened to this story once I turned it over to the people who made the musical. Like I had to just trust that they were going to handle it well. And I feel like they did, but it was an interesting exercise in just letting go. But I think they did an amazing job. And it was surreal. It was beautiful. I felt like they achieved something in the musical that I had hoped to achieve in the book and didn't quite manage. Like a musical is a very emotional experience, more so than a book, because a book is just like your own solitary thing. You're not in a room with other people. Anyhow, it was amazing. I highly recommend having a musical made of your childhood if you can.
We have just one sub question related to that one before you move on to Winnicott, which is, do you have a favorite song from the musical?
I don't really. They're kind of all on permanent rotation in my head. I love the soundtrack to that show. It's amazing. But I don't have a particular favorite. Maybe the one where all three Alisons are singing together at the end, flying away. If I had to. Okay, so the other question was about Donald Winnicott, this amazing psychoanalyst that I mentioned, that I wrote about in the book about my mother. He was just this, I just love this guy. I learned about his ideas. I felt like I wanted this guy to be my mother when I started learning about his ideas about what happened between them in the earliest days. I felt like he had some kind of almost magical insight into that time, and it was very healing for me. He's also very it's a lot of theories, very a lot of highfalutin psychological concepts that took me a long time to understand. I spent all my books take me a long time to write. Fun Home took me 7 years. The book about my mother took another 7 years. And a lot of that was spent just learning about Winnicott and learning about psychoanalysis. But somehow it was what I needed to do. Oh, someone said my video cut out. Can you see me? Am I doing okay? You're all kind of staring at me. I seem to be okay. Can you guys see me? I can't hear you.
I hear you. Yeah, you're okay now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Anything else?
So, before we end, I wanted you to just touch upon any advice you have for teen writers today, teen queer writers today, specifically artists. Any advice you have for them?
That's a good question. My advice is, I spent the day digging through an old pile of sketchbooks of mine, all dusty and moldy. My tip is, you got to keep a sketchbook. Start a sketchbook if you have not done so already. And here's the thing, put the date in it. I'm looking at these books and I'm like, when did I draw this? Where was I when this happened? Keep a sketchbook, and on the inside cover, write when you started it, because 40 years later, you're going to want to know. And I'm sort of preaching something that I don't practice. I'm not good at keeping up a notebook, but it's an extremely important thing to do. And it's fun, and you have something to do when you're sitting in a boring Zoom lecture. You can just write in your notebook. And you'll have this amazing record of your growth as an artist as you get better and try new things. Should always try and do some life drawing in there. If you're out and about, just try and draw people. Just try and draw something every day. That's basically my advice.
Good advice to leave on, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Big applause for Alison Bechdel, teens.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying and participating in this. This was a really magical experience. At this point, I'd like to welcome teens to join us at the teen after party. There will be cosplay, games, conversations with guest artists, so you can go ahead and do that. And thanks again, Alison, and teens, we hope to see you shortly.
Thank you. Bye-bye.